Hello, everyone. My name is Skylar,
My name is Anne.
and we have the pleasure to be your co-host today. And we're so thankful for you guys for coming. This is a reminder that if you're a BRI student, please put BRI before your name so we can take attendance. And I'll pass it on to Anne to go over for the agenda for this seminar.
Thank you, Skylar. So here is our seminar agenda. First, we will introduce what BRI Youth Group is. Then we will do an introduction to Mr. Peter Yee, and Mr. Peter Yee will begin his presentation. Lastly, we will have our Q&A session. If you guys have any questions during Mr. Yee's presentation, please fill in the anonymous form with the link in the chat box. Thank you. Now I will hand the next slide to Skylar.
Thank you, Anne. So what is BRI Youth? So it's a nonprofit organization that was founded during the pandemic, and its mission is to involve students in serving the educational and social needs of our local community by providing online classes and other community service volunteer opportunities. So if you're interested in learning more about this awesome organization, you can visit our website at www.briyouth.org. And now Anne can introduce Mr. Yee.
Thank you, Skylar. Combined with years of experience in teaching, managing, and consulting in the test prep and college counseling industries, Mr. Yee brings his expertise, enthusiasm, and passion into every working relationship. Equipped with 2 college counseling certifications from UC Berkeley Extension and Columbia University's Teachers College, he has been honored to assist his students in reaching many of our nation's most prestigious colleges and universities. Peter Yee will be giving us a presentation shortly. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit your questions to the Google form or Zoom chat box. Let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Yee.
Awesome. Skylar and Anne, thank you so much. So I'm going to take the screen and I'm going to put up, I believe, my deck. All right, let's try this. Are we here? Are we all here? Perfect. Okay. So everyone, good evening. Yeah, it's Saturday. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for BRI for the invitation to have me speak again at their kind of annual thing now, right, that we've been doing. A little bit about my background. I have some background in test prep industry and also have my own private college consultancy here in West San Jose. Over the last several years, I've had a wonderful pleasure of working with several, many students actually, many hundreds of students, yeah, in the California, San Francisco Bay Area and beyond. In my experience, I've accumulated some knowledge that I'm hoping to share with you today, as well as cover some of the recent trends in admission, so that everybody can be the best informed going into the college application season. And if your students are not rising seniors this year, I think that there's some good information that you can take away as well. So let's quickly take a look at the agenda for today. I wanted to kind of give everybody an update on what's going on with standardized testing. So mainly SAT and ACTs, and kind of see what the results have been so far and where the trend is heading, okay? Second, I want to kind of take a look at the UC admissions information because that recently came out and kind of give everybody an idea of what tangible steps that they can take in the coming months or years to best plan for UCs and beyond. And then I want to go into some information about high school success. And here I'm going to slow down and talk about, if your student is a 9th grader, 10th grader, 11th grader, or rising senior, or even 8th grader expecting to go to high school or expecting to transfer high school soon. What are the things to watch out for, and what are really the main objectives of every grade level, and how parents can help those students the best in each grade level? And then at the end, I'm going to introduce some essays to you to give you a snapshot of what type of questions colleges are asking students on college applications, and how students can really kind of develop that perspective much earlier than actual college application season. So let's jump into it. There's a lot to cover, and I'm always looking forward to your great questions at the end of the presentation. So please do put them in the chat, and then I'm sure the moderators will get to those at the end, and we'll get a chance to talk about those. So according to fairtest.org, which is a nonprofit organization that covers testing policies, and also the movement of the test optional schools. 73% of colleges are now actually test optional. That means that 73 out of roughly 2,300 colleges now are adopted a test optional policy. That means you don't need an SAT or ACT to potentially gain admission to that university or those universities. It's largely because of the COVID pandemic. Test optional movement, even before COVID in 2019, has already been gaining a lot of traction. At the time in 2019, I think somewhere around 700 or 800 schools already test optional. But when the pandemic hit us, it really sped up the movement. So now we have something around, I think, 1,800 colleges that are now test optional. So it's a big change, a big difference. You might recall from my presentation in 2020, if you were here for that at the time UCs announced a 5-year plan for SAT and ACT. Initially, they were going to be test optional 21, 22, test blind, meaning completely no tests, 23, 24. And then in 25, they were going to possibly consider creating their own exam, or just totally getting rid of the SAT and ACT. So far, because of the recent court cases, that in 2022 we already saw that UCs went test blind. That means they were not using SAT or ACT for admissions or scholarship purposes. And it doesn't look like they're going to be able to create a UC test. So I think that the foreseeable future, the UCs will be test blind moving forward. Yeah, so today, they're largely committed to a test blind environment, okay? And that means ACT and SAT will not be considered. The net effect of that is we can see right away in this recent admission cycle. The data just came out from the UC Regent's office, and we saw that there was an increase of 3.5% of applications overall to the University of California. And when we look at the in-state numbers, we saw that in 2021 there was 128,000. In 2022, roughly 132,000. For UC Berkeley, for UC Berkeley though, that number is actually pretty interesting, because if you look at the year over year, 2021 at 62,000 applications from California students. In 2022, there was an increase of over 10,000 applications. By far, the biggest jump among all UC campuses. And I think that that's directly related to the test blind policy. And at Davis, you see that there's about 4,500 application increase from the state of California. And then in Irvine, you've got an increase of about, looks like 6,000 applications from 21 to 22. In LA, we can see that there is a jump to 91,500. Merced, roughly flat, the same. Riverside, 1,200 applications. San Diego, about looks like 8,000 applications, and the Santa Barbara increased 2,000 applications, and Santa Cruz about 4,000 applications. So not requiring SATs or ACTs is creating the impact, obviously, right? So the idea is that the barrier of tests will be removed so that more students can have access to the UC, and that's clearly what's happening. And when you look at the numbers from San Diego and Berkeley, because you see the biggest jumps. So the admission numbers tended to the enrollment numbers are not acceptance rates, I should say, are not out yet, but obviously colleges cannot create enough more beds to keep up with the pace of demand, so you can expect the acceptance rates to decrease accordingly. I don't think that surprises anybody. So predictions, likely the UCs will be test blind for the foreseeable future. So unless something drastically changes with the courts, I think that UCs will not be able to use tests, even though maybe they, I personally think that they probably like to, and most colleges will like to, and for reasons we'll see in a minute. And expect more applications just because of students who are wanting to, try, not necessarily try their luck, but make an attempt or effort to apply to UCs because of the lack of testing. Okay. And I personally think that yield management is going to continue, has been a factor and will continue to be a factor. So everybody's, a lot of people have been hearing stories in their communities from their friends, from their families about students that they know that didn't get into a UC or any UC or most of the UCs that they applied to. And these students tend to be very stellar students. Maybe they have really strong GPA and wonderful academics, a wonderful rigor, wonderful extracurriculars, students that you would typically consider, very stellar or wonderful students and with very strong profiles. And why is it that students like that are not getting into a single UC or have very weak results from UCs in general? We don't have any verifiable information from the UC as to why that's happening, although certainly I think that they are aware that these results are becoming more and more prevalent in their admission cycles. But I think that a part of what it's feeding to that, and what a lot of colleges do, is they're trying to manage their enrollment, meaning they're trying to predict what students will actually come and attend their university if they were accepted or they were given an opportunity. And maybe they're running some algorithms or some data science to help make that prediction. So perhaps you have a student who is very, very strong that creates a perception of being admitted to a more selective UC, and so this less selective UC might make a different decision. For example, waitlist the student or straight denied the student, straight denied the student and just not accept him. Because they think that this student will likely yield or attend a different campus that's maybe more selective. And then maybe that more selective campus doesn't actually end up accepting this particular student. So, I could see that being a perfect example of a situation where a very qualified applicant will end up with very poor negative results. So I certainly see that in my caseload every year, which is why for 5 years now I've been telling my students to hedge against that, right? Or to create a backup plan by applying to more colleges in general. So typical students that I'm working with are applying to somewhere between 12 to 15 colleges outside of the UC system. And that method has been working out pretty well. And largely because we've seen, and I personally see in my case practice, that students are having less desirable outcomes from UCs year over year, from the UC year over year. MIT recently changed their policy again and actually reinstated standardized testing. And the information that we have from the dean is that quote, our research cannot explain why these tests are so predictive of academic preparedness for MIT, but we believe that it's likely related to centrality of mathematics and the mathematics exams in our education. So the dean basically says something very weird, in my opinion. He says that we don't know why the SAT or the ACT is reliable for us. We just know that we can use it as a somewhat reliable measure to predict how much students are ready for MIT education, primarily in math areas or areas relating to math. That's interesting because the majority of students many students who apply to MIT and get rejected are very strong in math, proven more than by the math section of the SAT. So, what is really going on? And so when this press release came out, counselors like myself had a big response and reaction. And I thought really hard about whether or not or how I was going to share this following information, which I think might be considered a little bit controversial, but I decided ultimately to share with you, which is kind of my observations as to why MIT reinstated that policy. So let's take a look. So there's some research done by a professor out of Otterbein in 2019, a series of research that goes into SAT. And the name of the research is what we know, what we are still getting wrong and have yet to learn about the relationship among SAT intelligence and achievement. And what the research actually is saying is that, and I'll quote it, that number one, there is some predictive value to intelligence to a certain degree that these standardized tests, both SAT and ACT, give them. In fact, in the two studies that they found, that SAT correlated up to 0.8, correlation factor with measure of fluid reasoning ability and G factor. So G factor is also known in the industry as general intelligence or general mental ability or cognitive functioning. So general intelligence factor. So there's a 0.08 correlation. I mean, 1.0 is high as it gets. So yes, there is some predictability of intelligence. There's also, right, so frame point number two, the research established that SAT and the SAT was G loaded, meaning there is a G factor loaded into these exams, so that in fact you can actually convert it to an IQ scale. So I think the SAT companies certainly won't tell you this because they don't want a student who's coming in with a lower diagnostic score to be perceived as a lower intelligence. And I would say that intelligence is not really a perfect word. In fact, if you look deeper into the research, there's a very complex definition of intelligence in that research. But I would say cognitive function, so your brain's ability to learn, process, connect, and relay information, is a certainly big aspect of that. Sorry here. The other factor is that tests do predict college achievement. Yeah. So when we looked at, when the research looked at 250,000 students, 250,000 students, right? The SAT combined with GPA from school does offer the best prediction of first-year GPA for college students. So that means when the student submits a GPA, and submits a standardized test score, those things together work really well. And in fact, when you look at the GPA plus test scores, together there's a 15% increase in predictability of, compared to students who only submit a GPA and not a test score. So yes, there's so much about college admissions is trying to predict student behavior, and which I'll talk about a little bit later, and also to predict student outcomes. The third thing is that the SAT is important to colleges. In fact, we see a 0.9 correlation between average SAT, ACT scores, and, for example, the U.S. News rankings. So, as much as I dislike rankings because there's, very imperfect methodologies to pretty much all rankings. You really can't ignore the high level of correlation. And I personally believe that most selective colleges certainly understands this data, and that if they could, they would probably do what MIT did and require the SAT. But for now, given the pandemic, and it is it does present challenges and barriers for students to get to testing sites, access the tests, pay for the test, pay for test preparation. Most colleges have chosen to be test optional, and many of them are, if not all of them, have stated for a certain period of time, so 2 years and 3 years. And I think that there's basically a really large experiment that's happening among colleges nationally on how test optional is actually going to serve them. And we'll see, maybe in 3 to 4 years, the graduations might go down, or the retention rates, meaning students finishing up first year of college and actually continuing into second year, maybe those numbers might be affected, and we'll know if those are those outcomes actually are happen, and whether or not test optional is ultimately good or not in the long run. So that's a big experiment that's been happening. So for students right now, what do you do? I mean, I think that in terms of your testing strategy currently, Um, Largely remains the same. I think that you still try to determine which test is the right test for you, whether it's the SAT or the ACT, and then you find the best time to take the test. And I used to work for a large test prep company, and I taught English and language to probably over 1,000 high school students in my time there. Um, I can tell you that the SAT is the most marketed test, and if you go to any test preparation company, you'll see that the ACT has more services offered. There's more tutoring. There's more, boot camps. There's more training around the SAT. Just because, from a consumer perspective, I think that there's more demand for that test. Although ACT and SAT are totally equal for colleges. Um, but for many of those students, I would say that the ACT actually might be the better test for them and more suitable for the way that they think and problem solve and take tests. So I think that's really important, especially if you have the time or you're, not yet you're in 9th or 10th grade. 10th grade tends to be the time the students actually, start thinking about these, is to take a practice test, or what we call like a diagnostic test, at home or at the testing location, and then try to figure out which test is best for you. There's plenty of people out there, such as myself or test prep companies, that can help you analyze the results, and then pick the right test and kind of stick to that. From my experience, I know that the timing of taking the test can be really, really important. In fact, I think it's very important. So what you generally want to do is you want to avoid downtime between the time that you do some preparation, whether it's by yourself at home, online, or with a test prep center or with a tutor. Is you really, the momentum going into the actual testing date is really, really important. In fact, if you create a gap, and many students tend to, like to prep, do some test prep in the summer before 11th grade, and oftentimes they'll take a break, go on vacation, and then come back, school starts, and then maybe they'll take an actual test. Now, so that's not ideal, right? Because then you lose the momentum and you tend to forget some of the things that you learned in test prep. So I think that you find the test dates that makes the most sense and doesn't conflict with semester finals or major project due dates or anything major going on in your life, and then try to reverse engineer or work backwards a plan to prep that will give you the most confidence and momentum after you find the right test. And you want to prepare well. And so preparing well for me always means taking enough full-length practice exams in ideally a simulated environment, certainly one time through, and giving yourself some 5-minute, 10-minute breaks in between sections, but one sitting all the way through to give you the most accurate reading. And you don't want to take one section in the morning, have lunch, and one section in the afternoon, and add those scores up. That'll skew the score higher, usually. And so that would not be predictive. But the best way to do it, prepare, is to take practice exams and to look at the trend of your overall score, and see how it's growing, how it's developing, how it's improving. And if you are doing purely self-study, you have to keep an open mind to maybe doing a little bit of formal preparation, because students sometimes tend to hit a peak if they do self-test or self-prep. Okay, they tend to hit a peak. So how do you know if testing is right for you at all? And for a certain population of our students, testing is not for them, right? For a number of reasons. Maybe they're just generally really good students in school, but for some reason they have some testing anxiety, or they just don't tend to do well, or they tend to be very unlucky with multiple choice questions, or other reasons. Those are reasons where you might think about not actually taking a test or submitting a test. Yeah, and if that's you, I would say that you want to look for other ways to individualize your profile. So the time that you will be spending, and the energy and the resources and the money that your parents will be spending to prepare for a test, is not likely to help you gain an advantage. And in the next slide, I'll show you kind of a graphic, the next 2 slides. Then we can make a decision, and you probably want to talk to a test prep professional or educational counselor, such as myself, to help you analyze the test scores and get to know your situation, your profile, and take a look at your academic record, and give you some guidance on whether or not standardized test is good for you. So I think that if anything, test optional policy is really making that option very viable for a certain set of students that traditionally just are bad test takers, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's very normal. Many people are actually like that. Again, in order to figure out if you're a good test taker or not, you might still want to follow steps 1 through 3 and do a little bit of, and see, you know, if you can improve, if you're happy with the improvement, or if you're improving at all, or if the test is, in terms of the format of the test and the process of taking the test, if that's, you know, if that's even something that is friendly to your brain, if you will. Okay, so there's actually a couple of places that I recommend if you want to have a diagnostic test actually proctored for you. So if you can't trust yourself to time yourself at home and do a test one time through, there's companies like Summit, or, you know, which is at mytutor.com, or Compass Prep, one of the industry leaders in test prep. You can actually go down their website and schedule a proctored test. So they'll give you resources to proctor yourself, basically to guide yourself, or they can do a virtual proctoring for you where you'll jump online and somebody will time you and remind you and watch you and all of that stuff. Compass actually has physical locations where you can sign up to go to their testing center and do a actual mock test for $50. I'm not sure how I feel about that yet personally, just because, you know, it's another expense. You know, it feels like, you know, the whole process of the actual test, but not really the actual tests. So that can create some stress for some of our families and students. But certainly, if you want the actual real environment of an actual test, that's probably the best environment, you know, best place to do that. Okay. So, you know, is testing for you? You should probably try to calibrate yourself. So in other words, take a look at the colleges that you're hoping to target. I mean, realistically target, not reach, right? Or crazy reaches, you know, because that'll not be helpful, and all those, you know, data will be always really high. But or you can, you know, talk to a college education advisor, such as myself or someone else in your area, and take a look at, you know, based on your profile up to this point, what colleges can you reasonably kind of expect to apply to later on in senior year. So every school, most colleges will publish this information, and it's always information about the incoming freshman class. So these are students who have been admitted to in this case, Purdue. And Purdue is very friendly. They published their class size, their number of applicants, their middle 50% GPA, which is unweighted, and their middle 50% SAT and ACT composite. So middle 50% simply means if 100 students applied, the student number 25 to student number 75, or 26 to 75, right? What's the range of those students' scores? And if you feel like if your score is in the middle of the middle 50%, that score is probably not going to do much for you. Okay, either way, right? So then you have to decide, hey, do I want to invest time, energy, resources to boost it? You know, if you boost it, how much do I boost it? Certainly, if your score is above, you know, in this case 1410, then you would be in presumably the top 25% of the students in their test scores, right? So that's how I would kind of approach this and see if testing is you know, realistic, if it's something that you should consider, if something that you should just forget about altogether. And I've had certainly students like that where I've advised them, hey, you know, testing is not good for you. Let's look for other ways to individualize your profile. Then what we can actually do is, you know, use that time and energy and resources on building their academic interest, their intellectual interest, you know, doing other projects, maybe some enrichment enrichment programs to still give them a kind of a self-realization and an academic profile and, you know, college targeting exercise, okay, without the test. So the major update actually regarding testing I wanted to share with you today is the fact that actually the SAT is going digital, and it's going digital by spring of 2024. So according to the College Board, this is what's going on. So spring of 23, they're going to start going digital for international students. Okay, and then fall 23, international and also some PSAT related assessments. But spring of 2024 in the United States, we're going to see a digitized version of the SAT. Okay, so depending on what grade level you are in, which I'll talk about in a little bit, this could present some interesting challenges. So what are the differences? I wanted to cover that with you today because I think that maybe many of you have not seen this. So the new digital SAT, the key features are, number one, it's going to be about a roughly 2-hour test. Exactly how long, we don't know. It's roughly 2 hours, they said. Currently, it's 3 hours. The paper version is 3 hours. It's a long test. Okay. It's going to be taken online, but you have to go to a testing location to do it. So you stop at the register, probably pay for the spot, show up, and you would bring your technology device like a laptop or a iPad or something like that. And then if you don't have one, they will provide you one. Because it's and then students testing will test together, but we'll have different versions of the test. So there's a big bank of questions that that they will pull from because it's computerized test, and everybody will have random tests. So it reduces cheating, right? Because if you look at someone's answers, they're looking at a different question, so it minimizes cheating. But actually, you can show up kind of in a block of time and start and stop at different points in time. If you ever taken a certification test or any sort of exam at like a Pearson test center, you can walk into a cubicle and you can start the test and end the test according to your time. So not everyone has to start at the same time. Okay. There's going to be administered in a locked down application. You have to download an application on your machine. And what that does is it actually disables all the other applications. So you can't flip screens or look at the internet or for answers or things like that. It's going to be purely, the testing platform. And then there will be people, proctors on site to monitor behavior and things like that. They will still have scratch paper. So the scratch paper is helpful, for writing out and doing, maybe, taking notes, et cetera. So that'll be available. And then College Board actually said that in the fall, they're going to have 4 practice tests available. So I think that everybody, especially test prep companies, will be looking for this information to build curriculum. And it might be helpful to take a look at it if you're in the younger grades. Certainly, I think if you're 9th or 10th grade right now, so class of 24, 25, 26, you probably want to definitely take a look at that. The key feature, the main feature is that it's stage adaptive. That means that at the end of the first section or stage, the test will actually choose the appropriate next level. And so the better that you do on the first section, the harder the next section, the second section will be. So it's adapting to your answers, which is pretty smart. Okay, and in terms of how they're scoring and how the scale and stuff, it's gonna, I think, still be 1600. But this piece is really interesting. So I'm curious to know how that works out. But it's actually a really big piece of news. Yeah, if you're in 10th grade or below. So if you're class of 2024, you're likely to take the paper version still. Okay, maybe with the exception of a few of you. If you're class of 2026, you're likely all taking the digital version. All right, and I probably think that would make sense. However, if you're currently a sophomore in a class of 2025, it really depends on when you peak, and this is very interesting, right? Because if you're peaking early and you feel like and you've taken the higher level math in school, and you are pretty good in the reading in the English sections, and you want to get it done, you're probably going to get it done earlier on the paper version. However, if you're like the average student or typical student, where their highest scores don't come toward the end of junior year, then most likely you're going to be doing your best score is probably going to show up on the digital version. So if you're in class of 2025, I would advise you to probably talk to either myself or someone in my space to help you analyze, or in test prep space to help you analyze what type of test taker you are, and lean on their experiences to tell you when they think you might peak and give you some resources to either get it done early or defer it to a later time to the digital version. Okay, so pretty interesting information there. So the next thing I want to talk about is just give you some broad high level information of how to achieve high school success. And I'm not talking about for college. Certainly the college is the end product. And I think that, not end product, but it's what happens after high school. And then of course, everybody's here to hear me talk about college and college success and all of that stuff. And I really think that college options, having good college options really comes from, a deliberate, self-focused process and self-learning process and journey throughout high school. So let's talk about what that means. So if you're a student who's maybe in the 8th grade right now, or getting ready to go to high school in 9th grade, or if you're currently in 9th grade, if you're a parent of a student, in 8th grade, 9th grade, you know, 9th grade is about transitioning. Okay, and it's about transitioning from a 8th grade class environment, educational environment, to a much larger, competitive, and demanding environment. And so they're one of the reasons why colleges tend to be very more forgiving about 9th grade grades, is because a lot of things are happening to our children in that 9th grade, especially that first semester. They're adapting to a lot of changes academically, right? There's more workload. Intellectually, there's more demand for students to engage in class from teachers, and the social emotional piece of it, new friend circles, also growing, maturing, those type of things. So it's an adjustment period, and for all of our students, and we tend to see, ideally, what I like to see my students is fully adjusted in that second semester of freshman year, and really kind of gain the awareness of what's required in a high school setting, what can they output, and kind of how they internalize their attitude toward high school, because it is foundational, right? High school, the first year sets the foundation, as you know, if you're in, especially the public school systems, the science and the math track that you come in at dictates what track you're on for the rest of the way, right? And oftentimes it's really difficult to jump. So those tend to be very predictable. So it's important to have a really good start to your freshman year. And for parents, I think that if your student is in 9th grade, heading to 9th grade, you want to be active in supporting your students. So we really want to try to encourage students to explore and identify what resources are available at their school. I want to talk about what resources are and how they reflect on college applications. Colleges are always trying to read the future, okay, and they're always trying to make prediction about the student. When our students go to high school, there are a number of resources that are on much larger scale than they have been in middle school. So the examples of resources are obviously classes. So you have college prep classes, honors classes, AP classes, IB classes if you're on IB curriculum. There are also sports, music activities, band. There's a number of clubs. In fact, usually high schools post their clubs on the school website, and there's sometimes 40, 50 different student organizations and clubs. There's ASB, student government, all of those things as well available. So all of those things that we have access to within the school environment are resources to us as students. Okay, so rather than thinking about having to do activities to quote unquote look good for colleges, or to boost your profile, you want to think about those as actual resources for your own personal development. When I go to high school, I'm going to have all these things, and for me to maximize my experience in high school and explore different things and learn more about myself in the process, I really should try to engage in as many things as I can, especially in freshman year, where you're really just trying different things out. And later we'll talk about how do we optimize and focus and and adjust those type of things. But in freshman year, we really, as parents, we want to encourage our students to don't be shy, and check out different things, and you can make adjustments and drop later. But if you don't explore, you'll never know what's out there. If you don't know what's out there, you'll never really have a good idea of who you are and what you want to do, which is the number one stressful question that I think parents tend to ask students at this age is, what do you want to do? You got to figure it out. But I think that in my practice, what I've seen is that parents are oftentimes um, um, not framing the conversation in the correct way. So they'll ask the question, but they oftentimes will just leave the question completely up to their students to figure out. And our sons and daughters at age 14 and 15 does not possess the mental power to be able to figure that out, no matter how much information we give them. Parents have to be there and support them in making decisions in that process. And you're also developing good high school relationship. You're developing good parent-child relationships throughout the high school process and have a less stressful time overall inside the household. Okay. So exploration and looking at different things in high school as resources, because when colleges look at your profile, they look at what you have engaged yourself in. They're trying to predict how you'll behave when you go to their college with a lot more resources, right? So again, earlier I said it's about predicting behavior, and it's about predicting outcomes and performance in college. Okay, and so those are very resources are very predictive. Okay. When you're into sophomore year, this is where I personally really like to see an increase in, what I call self-efficacy, or usually it's academic self-efficacy, and which is basically this concept in education where this individual student develops his or her own personal internal attitude toward school life. What do they want from it? How do they want to approach the academics? How do they perceive the importance of accumulating knowledge? And how did they perceive their own drive to get that knowledge, right? So I've not said anything about, chasing colleges or getting straight A's, right? Those are end products. That's not the process. What we're to focus on is looking at the process. So in 10th grade is where I would love to see my students develop a stronger sense of self-efficacy, so stronger conviction that, hey, I've been here for 1 year. I see what's out here. I see what my peers how they're behaving. I'm seeing my limits. I'm seeing where I want to challenge myself in different areas. I'm seeing what I want to do, what I want to focus on, and I'm ready to really devote my time and effort into having a successful experience for my own personal growth. That's really how you want to look at it. So the way that you can tell if a student has kind of a high efficacy, self-efficacy is you look at how they respond to the increase in classes, challenges, rigor, workload, extracurricular involvement. And students who tend to be more proactive. I mean, everybody is having some anxiety and stress. Certain level is normal, but overall, students with high efficacy tend to feel a certain sense of calmness. They feel like, yeah, I can do this. And when you talk to them, they tend to be very not confident. They're very balanced in their thinking, and they tend to be very aware and mature in their thinking and in the way that they explain their decisions to parents. Students who I think will have slightly lower efficacy will show a higher level of anxiety when it comes to classes. So they'll have, for example, oh, I don't know what classes I should take. I got these grades, but should I take these harder classes? Because I want to try them because I know they'll help me ultimately with college, but then I've never had to work this hard before. And so you see more of more stress in that decision-making process and that anxiety level. So I think that that's the perfect opportunity to talk to them more and listen to them and hear them identify their actual fears. Because a lot of times, especially students, they don't always say how they feel, and they can't always express how they're really feeling. So, that's another value of maybe working with a high school coach such as myself, or somebody's experienced with high school students in an academic setting and have seen students go through the 4 grade levels in high school to understand what's really going on in their mind and trying to help calm that anxiety as much as possible. So sophomore year is a year where most kids know and can feel that, hey, things are about to get really serious. 10th grade grades start to count for college. We hear that a lot. And they've been hearing that junior year is the hardest year ever since probably middle school, maybe as early as elementary school. And so sophomore year gets you really close to junior year. So that's where the stress can really compound. So for families, for parents, you really want to work on communication. Parents are always wanting to know, hey, what's going on in school? How can mommy and daddy help you? What resources can we put there to help you do this? But the breakdown tend to usually happen on the student side, because students are the ones doing their learning actively every day, and they're the ones that are trying to shoulder this burden. And sometimes students make the mistake of not communicating with their students when they really should be. The classic example is if a student enters into an honors level class or maybe an AP level class, and it's really hard. The hardest class they've ever taken, the first test, they get a bad grade, a C, maybe a D, sometimes an even an F. And so, you know, occurrences like that are sometimes takes a long time to overcome, so that students know that, hey, now my grade's a C, I got to really fight hard to climb up the ladder to get my grade back up to a B or even an A, right? And so the whole time mom and dad are saying, hey, what can we do for you? What can we help you? Tell us what you need. Student thinks, don't worry, I have this under control. I'm just going to study harder, carry my load, and hopefully get my grade back up, with all the best intentions. However, that doesn't always happen. And so what happens is when semester ends, student ends up with a bad grade, right? And no one's happy, because the student feels really, really negative about himself or herself, because they feel like, oh, I'm not capable, I'm not good enough, I can't do this by myself. The parents are frustrated because the parents have been asking the students all along, how can we help you? What can we do? So we have a total breakdown in communication at that step. That tends to always happen more so in sophomore year, and I see it quite a bit. So if students can be more honest and open, say, mom, first 2 weeks, this class is hard. I might need a tutor. I might need to get some additional resources. I'm going to go to more office hours, and maybe I get my friends to help me. Then mom and dad can communicate and look for resources to help the student as well. That communication is always key. The communication is always very, very key, especially in this particular year. In junior year is when everything gets very, 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 very serious. So the pressure is really on in junior years. Some students will be really motivated to start looking for a narrowed focus, because the idea of applying to college is becoming very real. And so they know that, okay, I really have to focus and get my work done. And you tend to see, students really respond well, want to challenge harder classes, put more time on, prepping homework assignments and sleeping later. That's another thing we have to worry about is, load management, right? And making sure that we're eating healthy, we're sleeping well, and that's a positive cycle, not a negative cycle. So for our students, it means that sometimes making some sacrifices. If you've got some issues with video games or social media or social sphere, you got to make some mature decisions and try to cut back on some of those things. And if you can't help yourself, we have to find some ways to help you. Okay. Students can, you can see at home, you can see sometimes a student, like I said, increased intensity for certain academic focus. Students say, look, I think I want to pursue computer science. I think I want to pursue psychology, and I want to try to do something this year to really learn more about those things, or to maybe experience those things. Maybe it's in the summertime or something like that, or some enrichment concurrent to school year. Okay, but time is the only limited resource. So what you have to do in this particular example is sometimes you have to make sacrifices. So you see things, kids like maybe cutting back hours in their music involvement if they play an instrument, but they don't really perform at any level, right? They might cut back on there are some less important extracurriculars. Maybe they cut back on sports, right? They might quit the team, or they might keep the team and quit the club, or they might quit the club and quit the team and continue the club, or they might make some adjustments in maybe cutting back or completely stopping things that they've done growing up as a young child, like art classes or things like that. Those things are totally normal, and it's really important to kind of discuss those things together and talk about what adjustments need to be made in junior year, because this is the year to be making adjustments. And of course, standardized testing, ACT, SAT is adding to that workload, because we tend to see higher scores toward the end of that, that junior year, and maybe even into the beginning of senior year, right? Because what's going on? Kids' brains are developing, their cognitive function is improving, they're learning more information and knowledge and content. So all signs point to a better success on standardized testing the later you take it. There's just a natural advantage the later that you take it. So don't feel like you have to rush to take the test. But in some rare instances, it does make sense. Okay, and oftentimes students internalize this and think to myself, well, this is my last chance to build my profile before I apply to college. So I have a lot of pressure to apply to the perfect summer program. And people know that, hey, some of these programs have very early deadlines, February, January, sometimes even December. That means in the middle of junior year, they're having to worry about summer. On top of the AP classes, on top of having to get recommendations from teachers, and on top of testing. So that you can see where all the pressure is starting to compound. But if you took some successful steps from an earlier stage, 9th grade, 10th grade, we can try to mitigate or minimize that as much as we can and still be very effective. Okay. So self-awareness is really important. And I think the self-awareness, as you heard me say earlier, I think self-awareness is really the most important thing when it comes to high school. It's really everything you do should be pointing back to yourself. Okay. And in a second, we'll take a look at why. All right. So if you're looking at school as a means to an end, it's a way to get to college, I want you to please stop that thinking right now and redirect your thinking and retrain your brain to think about high school is about me. It's not about the school that I'm going to. Okay. Senior year. Yeah. So, often college applications feels like another AP class. I tell my kids, you're in my AP college apps class, and there's homework. There's a lot of essays and reflective essays and writing in a way that students have never done before. Most students have never done before. Okay. So even though, usually courses in 12th grade tend to be considered generally easier than 11th grade, you still have to maintain, the rigor and the performance in those courses, so that there is some of that pressure there. And of course, there's always burnout in senior year because, the senioritis, right? So it's when you get to senior year, graduation so close, college application, college decisions are so close, students feel like, I'm tired, so they'll sometimes dissociate a little bit. And I've seen that in a number of cases where they are literally just can't process too much information anymore. And it's important to try to be aware that this could happen and what are the signs of this happening and try to mitigate that and manage it. And usually for parents in senior year, that's where you want to be a little bit less involved than you have been, and give the students a little bit more room and freedom to operate, particularly on their college applications. Okay. So what are colleges looking for? Let's look at some examples and we kind of develop an idea, and then I'll end with a new perspective on your extracurriculars, and then we'll take some questions. So if you look at a school like Santa Clara University, here's an interesting question for you that showed up on the application this past year, right? So Santa Clara particularly said, look, at Santa Clara, we push our students to be creative, be challenged, okay, and be the solution. Think about an ethical dilemma that you care about, that our society is currently facing. This can be something happening in your local community or globally. How can Santa Clara education help prepare you to address this challenge? So I highlighted the part, an ethical dilemma that you care about. The observation is that many students don't even know what ethical dilemma tend to be, let alone care about them. And so, but schools like Santa Clara, which is a Jesuit or a kind of like a Catholic priesthood order type of school, they care about students who are society or community minded. And so they will ask you a question about ethical dilemma. Really hard question this year. So ethical dilemma is like, if you think about individual rights versus duties to other people or for the common good, right? This is, I think, something that we're facing as a nation today. It's a big ethical dilemma. Is, hey, I want my freedom, personal rights, personal choices, right? But to what extent am I sacrificing, my contribution to society as a whole, to the common good of the people? That's a major ethical dilemma, right? So for a school like Santa Clara, that's comes from a religious background, they care about that mindset. So that's something that they're making students think about. So if our students are doing programs, especially when they volunteer or do service work, Boy Scouts, BRI, right? They're not doing simply they shouldn't be doing it for the President's Awards or the service hours or to meet the graduation requirements. They really should be thinking about more deeply about what they're doing and why they're doing it, because that's going to give them insight to the world, number one, to themselves, number two, and be better equipped to approach college application season and essays during that season. Another example, it comes from Rice University in Texas. It's pretty interesting. It's one that's been there for a number of years, and I don't think it's going to change for a while. Rice is known for creating a very collaborative, so teamwork atmosphere that enhances the quality of life for all members of the campus community. The residential college system, which is unique to their campus, and a few others, and undergraduate life are heavily influenced by unique life experiences and cultural traditions, and each student brings. Okay, so right there, they're giving you a clue on what you should be prepared to talk about, your life experiences and traditions. Question: what life perspectives would you contribute to our community, to the Rice community? What life perspective? So what's a life perspective? That's an outlook on how you see the world, right? It's an outlook on the world and how you see the world through your lens, and how you go about living your life in this world, right? So some different life perspectives are growth mindset. Whatever I learn, I like to learn deeply, and I like to learn a lot of it because I'm curious about how things function. And so my approach toward life is to be very curious. That's an example, right? So then in this particular example that I gave you, okay, so how would that curiosity impact positively this particular college community? In this case, it's Rice, right? So it's asking students to be very self-aware. Earlier, I said that high school should be an experience in developing self-awareness. It should not be an experience in doing school to achieve an outcome, okay? Carnegie Mellon says many students pursue college for a specific degree, career opportunity, or personal goal, because they know that many students write about getting a job, right? So they immediately took that away from you, and they said, whatever it may be, learning will be critical to achieve your ultimate goal. As you think ahead to the process of learning during your college years, how will you define a successful college experience? So basically, if you read this question correctly, you cannot say, because I want to get a good job, a stable job, and make stable income and have a stable life. That's probably the most cliche answer that you can give, and doesn't tell anything about you. In fact, that's not what they want as a student. They want you to actually think about, up until this point, the only experience you really had was in high school, right? So if you think about your process of learning in your particular high school experience, collaborative, you did a lot of peer study, peer groups, teacher office hours, right? Additional resources that you look for yourself, self-directed learning, and then experience maybe in little introductory experience at the high school level. So how you learn, you cannot describe your process of learning without understanding how you learn as a student, as a person, right? So that ultimately taps into self-awareness. And then you have to explain, how would you define a successful college experience, not a successful college outcome? Getting a job is an outcome. Getting a job is not experience, okay? So hopefully as parents, if you're here watching this, you have a deep appreciation for what our students are going through in senior year and having to write these type of questions. Because if I were to give any of you in your industry or your profession these questions, many of you will probably really struggle as well, right? So we really have to respect how really challenging it is in today's environment for our students to apply to college in general, okay? And lastly, Columbia says, a hallmark of the Columbia experience is being able to learn and live in a community with a wide range of perspectives, meaning your background shapes your perspectives. How do you or would you learn from or contribute to a diverse collaborative community? So that, in 200 words, that's not very many words at all. Really deep question. In fact, you have to read it 3 times to understand what it means, right? How do you or would you learn, or how would you learn from and contribute to diverse collaborative community? Okay, so if you don't have self-awareness in terms of how you contributed to your high school community, you're probably not going to be able to answer this in 200 words. you might be able to answer in 400 words. So not only is it a difficult question, they force you to be very direct and to the point and to use only 200 words to answer a very difficult question. Okay. So let's look at some extracurriculars. We'll kind of end on this, right? So what's the new perspective? I've shared this in my previous presentations before, but I always like to do this because I think that it's really good to calibrate our perspective, and because it's so easy to get lost in the things that we're doing. If you're doing any sort of robotics on campus, if you're doing FBLA, which is business organization, right? HOSA, which is a medical club, or DECA, which is a business leadership program, you have to really, first of all, you have to really critically know your role, and you have to know your role, I think, in relationship to other people's roles. You have to understand how you fit in as a person, as a collaborator, and as a team member. So typical roles in these settings are robot designer, coder, builder, team manager. You manage travel, you manage expenses. Maybe you're part of the marketing team, or you write copy, or you may be the artistic subgroup, right? Whatever you do, here's the thing: is you want to ask yourself, what's the goal of going in, right? Set some goals for yourself, right, before taking on the role. And then how would you define a successful outcome? How do you want to see yourself grow within this space, okay, within this role, right? And how would you define a successful outcome? And number two, besides your technical input, in other words, if you cannot talk about your immediate job function, your tangible skills, if you're a coder and you can't talk about coding, if you're a builder, you can't talk about engineering, if you're a manager, you can't talk about logistics, right? If you're artistic, you can't talk about drawing or digital design or graphics, okay? How can you describe the question? How do you answer the question, how did you serve your role to benefit the team as a whole? Besides the what you did, right? In other words, your personal contribution, right? In terms of like the chemistry of the team, right? Or building relationships or interpersonal relationships or communication, those type of things. If you in band or orchestra, or you symphony, or you compete, or you repertoire, or you just play piano for fun, you just take lessons, maybe you have CM level, certificate of merit, ABRSM, Royal Conservatory, one of those merit systems. How has band changed your views about playing an instrument, right? Many kids will say, well, my mom just gave me a clarinet and I had to do it. That's the honest answer, but okay, so let's think about that differently. So like, so you played it, what advice do you have for someone who wants to play it, right? I feel like if you started in third grade and you have another student, your neighbor, who wants to start in third grade because he's in third grade now, what advice would you have for that student, besides maybe don't do it, right? Or how would you approach it? How would you teach that person, that student, or that young child, okay? What advice would you have for someone who's considering doing band in high school or marching band, right? Okay. Besides music, what do you believe is the most important factor in a successful band, right? Again, I'm think about this, because I'm not allowing you to think about your instrument, right? Because most kids say, well, just play your instrument well. But what if you can't talk about playing your instrument, right? Then you have to say, well, you have to have good section leaders, drum majors, right? Soloist, you have to have good leadership. You have to have good team chemistry. You have to be in sync. You have to have trust, all of those things. Yeah, guess what? All of those are factors of leadership that can translate into a really effective, content later of when expressing yourself on applications. Okay. What's the biggest issue? So if you're ASB, student council, or if you're any sort of leadership, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer for any sort of club or student organization, you have to be ready to talk about your organization. Like, what's the biggest issue that your class faces today? If you're in student leadership, I expect you to be able to answer this intelligently. How has your role shaped you as a person? That's a really deep question, right? You might say, before I took on this role, I didn't think that I knew how to really effectively communicate with people or impact with people in a meaningful way, or be a good leader in connecting with others. right? And so it gave me confidence, it gave me self-awareness, and it gave me relational skills. It gave me emotional intelligence, right? And it gave me insight into how complex personal relationships can be. Okay, really great answers. And then if you're, if you're graduating, Aaron, and you're president of a club, or you have some leadership role, and then you're stepping out, or maybe you founded a club or organization, but you're leaving. What legacy do you want to leave behind for the people that are going to follow you to do this thing that you did, right? Or to manage this thing that you created, right? Or to continue, or to proliferate whatever activity, organization, thing that you're doing, right? What do you want to leave behind? How do you envision the future for that thing that you do? Okay. And then if you're very basic, you're doing volunteer. It's not, you're not basic, but many kids do volunteer work. But if you don't have other things that we discussed, and you do volunteer work, even if it's at BRI or whatever, like, why did you pick BRI over FCSN or Tule Pond or Reading River, or if you're Fremont, or like Asian Liver Center, or Cars for Kids or Food Bank, whatever it is, right? Why did BRI's values resonate with you to where you wanted to really make an impact in that organization? And then what's the most interesting thing about your work that others may not know, right? Because I'm a high school coach. I think of myself as a high school coach. I help students through high school process, right? Even though I think most of you know me as a college counselor, I see myself actually as a high school coach, because if you come in at the end of junior year, there's really not much I can do except just to help you apply to college. Whereas a lot of the meaningful work happens even before junior year, right? So if you ask me some interesting things about my particular career, yeah, I have many of them, and a lot of them I've shared with you today on this call, right? And just like all our parents who worked, or even parents who don't work, if you're a stay-at-home parent, that's not easy. And so there's always interesting insight into the things that we do and care about the most doing. Okay. And then how would you make it better? I think about that, right? So for example, if I were volunteering at BRI, and I was a tutor for an online class of third graders, and I tutored, I don't know, Japanese, whatever it is, like, maybe I identify some opportunities to make the logistics better, the organizational structure better, maybe the way that we reach out to students, or maybe even the way that we taught students and connected with students. All of those things should prompt me to speak up and talk to the administrators at BRI and try to create change incrementally to even better streamline the process and work out more bugs, right? So that's more of like, that takes a lot of efficacy, like I said earlier, advocacy, meaning, speaking up for yourself, and also initiative, right? And if you're comfortable working in this space at BRI, I would imagine that you'd be pretty comfortable, when you debrief with your other teachers or your course plan, you're coming in with creative ideas to make it better for everybody. Okay. So if you're an artist, I love this one, right? If you're an artist, you play an instrument, you dance, you sing, you act, maybe you compete even on those levels, if you're trying to art programs, I think that all art programs want to know, what is your intention behind your artwork? What does creativity mean to you? And then what's the role of artists within society? And that's a really important question if you're a true artist, right? And on top of that, creativity is a big thing when you talk about artists, especially in visual arts, right? And like, are you drawing objects with references? Are you free-flowing creativity, maybe in a three-dimensional space? All of those things should be nurtured and considered if you're an artist. Okay. So if you're doing a research project, I know many of you are in Fremont, you're doing ASDRP, maybe you're doing Horizon, Polygents, or Pioneer, or you're working with a professor in a community, or you're working with another research organization, or Cosmos, or SIP, or SRA, whatever. You're learning about the research process first and foremost, right? Not necessarily the specific research that you're doing. I think you're learning about the research process. So in my mind, research, what's the research process? What part of it do you think is the most important to you, right? And how will that, how does that influence maybe your desire to be in the scientific fields, or maybe in research related jobs, right? So what aspect of research kind of stands out? Some people like digging investigative aspects of research. Some people like hypothesis, drawing conclusions, maybe presenting the information, right? We would expect you to know those or have some preferences. And research is never perfect. What would you have done differently? What would you maybe have approached it differently? Like the different data sets, maybe a different question altogether. And how would you grade yourself as a researcher? Those type of things that really are open-ended, right? Is usually a really good start. If you're just starting out and the only experience you've had is working in a class project in middle school and you haven't even been to high school, that's okay, right? You're going to get more projects like that in high school in different classes at different levels and scale. What was the most difficult part about working in a group, right? And oftentimes students will say it's managing students or working with students who doesn't do work, right? You feel like, oh, I have to carry the team and these kids are never working. They never do their parts. So I have to do it because I want to care about my grade. Or, it's like, there's too many alphas, like I want to have my way, but this person want to have their way. So there's some personal conflicts there, right? What is it? What's the easiest part? And then, and you look at, the process of working through a group. How did you ensure the overall success of the project? And then maybe give some good or bad experiences in terms of working in a group project. Okay, so those are all some different things. So takeaways today, and then we'll go to some Q&A, is high school should be about learning about yourself. It really should be about that. Okay, you should always start with that approach. I think the admissions officers, especially in COVID, will also understand if your grades are incomplete. For example, if you have some pass, no pass grades, or you have some less than perfect grades, and we're seeing that some students are struggling with less than perfect grades or grades that they know that they can be better at. Because number one, online learning wasn't effective, it wasn't engaging. Maybe the teachers didn't teach to the same level or standard, and when they went back to in-person learning, there was some gap there, right? The admission officers are very understanding of that now, and that we should probably address that, right? Yeah, entrance exams, so SAT, ACT are generally less important, especially if you're kind of a bad test taker. And I think that personality will continue to count more and more on your applications, okay? And then lastly, community involvement and impact and self-directed learning and development will be more important, right? Have more importance. So more than just school, what are other ways that you're utilizing to, again, learn more about yourself, learn more about your preferences, and learn more about the world and the world that you want to be in, okay? So that's my time. I'm actually going to switch off of my AirPods and just go to speaker because they're out of battery, and then I'll kick it back to the moderator.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Now we'll be moving on to the Q&A session.
Yes, and I will be sharing my screen real quick.
Also, thank you so much for your presentation.
Okay, I got it.
I can start. Oh.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So I saw there's some questions in the chat as well. Skylar, don't forget, let's make sure we get to those at at the end as well.
Okay. The first question is, I heard that one student took 15 AP tests with great score and good GPA, but was rejected by UCs and only accepted by San Jose State. How important are AP tests in college applications?
First of all, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry to that student. I'm sorry that you heard about this. But this is, basically what I was talking about earlier, right? Which is when at the UC portion of my presentation, I said that, look, it's unpredictable. And I think that UC is kind of playing, they're strategizing and they try to predict what students will come, right? But ultimately, I think that number one, anytime we hear about situations like that in the community, we're almost always oversimplifying the situation, right? In other words, you're only hearing about the 15 APs and whatever the test score was, but you're not hearing about the grades, you're not hearing about the extracurriculars, you're not getting any information about the student's personal context, right? With their family, parents do, where they are, how are they the first to go to college in the United States, or their essays look like, right? And even what their recommendations look like, even though UCs don't look at regs, if and this is an example where maybe they didn't apply to enough colleges, and they didn't, they were too confident or didn't understand the reality of how the UCs are evaluating. So it's an unfortunate situation, but I want you to understand this. Colleges don't require AP exams because AP exams are, number one, AP courses are optional. You can choose to take them. You can choose not to take them. So AP exams are optional exams. You cannot require them for admissions purposes. However, if you do have them, it can help your profile in applying to college, right? But I would say that it usually doesn't come down to that, because if it's an optional test, it can't hurt you. It can only help you. So even if you submitted 1s and 2s on your AP exams, at worst, it's neutral, right? Unless you're submitting, a 1 or 2 in AP calculus and you're applying for engineering, that's not going to help you because you didn't pass, right? But for the most part, it's going to be neutral, right? So the question is, okay, then what are we working with? Maybe a test score, right? Was the question 15 APs and test score, Skylar?
I don't think it said anything about a test score.
What was the marker? I forgot.
Oh yeah, the good scores on AP tests.
That's it, right? That's it. There's nothing. Okay. Yeah. So that's not likely what made the decision. The decision was mostly probably the grades and the essays for UC. Yeah.
Thank you. So the next question is, when should we ask for a recommendation letter?
Yeah, so recommendation letters, generally, depending on the school that you go to, teachers are, some kids will ask in the second semester, toward the end of the second semester of junior year, or some teachers will say, hey, ask me in the fall, so it'll be the beginning of senior year. Teachers don't generally like to get asked too early. Yeah. But part of what I do with my kids is I try to get a accurate feeling on what teachers are the best teachers to ask, because they don't always tend to be the teachers that you had the best grades in with. Okay, it's subjective.
The next question is, what range of SAT score is considered as a good SAT score that can be submitted to the colleges?
Yeah, so later on, when you look at my presentation on YouTube, I think ladies, you put it on YouTube, right? I had a section on SAT scores where I showed the Purdue's incoming freshman class. Okay, so you have to start by looking at colleges that you could realistically apply to and get into, and maybe realistically reach for, not super reachers. All Ivies, top 30s, Stanford are going to probably be super reachers for everybody. Okay, so if you have to look at rankings, look for lower ranking schools that are more reasonable. But for example, if you want to look at UC, well, they don't use SAT anymore. If you look at Santa Clara, for example, you can simply look at their freshman profile and look at that middle 50% range, right? And I don't like the median score. I think that's deceptive. But if they look at the middle 50%, that's the most helpful. And so you kind of see, okay, if I want to target this school, my score should be, in the higher end of the middle 50%, or maybe even above the middle 50% or the top 25.
Okay, thank you. So another question just popped in. How important is like the GPA, and about like what GPA is like considered as very good?
So this is a really, really, really tricky question, and I'm gonna try to explain it the best way I can. It depends. It depends on a number of factors. It depends on the school that you're coming from and what kind of coursework is available in your school, because every school is different, right? So the number of college prep, honors, APs vary between schools. So Lynbrook is different from Cupertino, is different from Monte Vista, right? Different from Homestead. Irvington is different from Mission, from American, from Kennedy, from Washington, right? Depending on the district you're in. Leland's different from Branham, from Pioneer. Harker is certainly very different from Basis, from Bellarmine, right? So number one, it really depends on what courses are available at your school. And the college will see that. College will get a school report where the counselors will fill out and literally tell the school, it's a high school profile. How many college prep classes we have, how many honors classes we have, how many AP classes we have, and how do we weight our GPA? Do we rank our students? Those type of things. Okay. Then within that context, they can look at maybe all the applicants or students applying from your school and compare those kids together and to get an idea of where you stand. Maybe they'll even look at students from previous years who applied to your school, right? And then they'll try to gauge for where you stand that way. So it's subjective to the classes that are available, the classes that you take, and how you do. I can't give you a number.
Thank you. The next question is, how long is the SAT score valid for?
So if you took it anywhere in high school, it's valid for a college application. I think it's 5 years.
Okay. And the next question is, you mentioned that UC will be test optional for SAT or ACT in 2021 to 2022 and test blind in 2023 to 2024. Then which one is applicable to class 2023? Is it test optional or test blind? Class 2023.
Yeah. 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 I got it. So that slide was from 2020. That was at the time, that was their 5-year plan. Okay. So for us right now, UC is test blind, period, going forward. So that's all you have to remember. Yeah. But because you should probably apply to other schools besides the UCs, and those schools will most likely be test optional, we should try to consider tests if we can.
Thank you. The next question is, how does college weigh GPA? For example, if you get like an A in the regular class compared to B in the accelerated class, which one would be better or so?
Yeah, so this is interesting because it depends on the student, right? It depends on the student, what their actual profile looks like and what their grade and course profile looks like. There's really no hard numerical value that I can give you. I would say that a good balance is, however many that the student can reasonably handle without being overloaded. Because colleges they do want to see you, quote unquote, challenge the course rigor, right? But I would say that no colleges want to see you like overburden yourself with them, right? So I think that their answer to you would always be challenge, but find your bandwidth. And sometimes, when you do other activities, it's hard to have an objective evaluation of where your bandwidth is. And so it's probably helpful to talk to someone who, have seen a lot of kids and can get an objective opinion about it, but there's no hard number. And I think that would be unreasonable to say, hey, it would be not responsible for me to say, hey, 12 or 10 or 8. It's not, I'm not comfortable doing that.
So should we take as many APs as possible? What is the good balance between the number of AP exams and other activities such as competition or volunteer service?
Yeah, again, a good balance really depends on the student. Some students can function with a lot on their activities and and things on their plate, right? Whereas other students maybe need more time to do the things that they're doing, or they're very detail oriented, right? They're very methodical in the way that they work. That impacts how much they can literally do, right? So to me, I think that you have to take a look at the big picture in terms of, hey, what's the goal here? What do we want to achieve in terms of how we want our students to develop, what the expectations of parents are, what's their philosophy as parents, and then what do we think a good outcome would be for college, and then try to maybe work it backwards into a balance that makes sense.
Thank you. One question is, would it be possible for you to share the presentation slides?
Yeah, I'll send it to you later and you can put it up or I guess you're recording this so you can put it up on the YouTube.
Okay. And if playing at school varsity sports team takes too much time, Does it make the student look bad if he quits in 11th grade or 12th grade?
If he quits in 11th grade or 12th grade, okay. If playing a school varsity sport team takes too much time, does it make a student look bad if he quits? No, no. Let me tell you why. That happens a lot. In fact, if you look at my slide on high school success, in 11th grade, I specifically talking about making different adjustments. And oftentimes it's cutting back sports. Colleges, if you ask all of them or any of them, they'll tell you that, hey, high school isn't primarily an academic endeavor, just like college. In other words, when you go to school, your first function is to learn and be a student, right? It's academic. So I think it's a positive thing. Sometimes if you make the case that, hey, I needed to prioritize my life or refocus or focus my time on more important things at hand, that could be a reflection of good decision making. So in fact, it could look good rather than bad. I don't think it looks bad if you explain it in a way that makes good sense.
The next question is, some colleges have like some classes taught by professors or by TAs. So how much of that should I consider when I apply for colleges?
I think that you have to probably pay attention to the type of college you're applying to, right? I mean, if you're talking about a UC or any sort of large, maybe public, university, where there's tens of thousands of students and they have graduate programs, usually you have lectures with a professor, large lecture-based, especially in the lower level classes. Then you have discussion section that you attend where it's smaller, 20, 30, maybe 10, 15, I don't know, smaller groups that are led by graduate students, okay? And so that tends to be where your engagement comes. However, if you go to a smaller university or a liberal arts school, they tend to be private, right? Then they tend to be less graduate students, sometimes even none. And the professor's primary responsibility is to teach, not to research and then teach. So then in your classes, average or smaller, so you have more chance to engage the professors. So if you're comfortable speaking up in private schools, especially liberal arts schools, they tend to really emphasize soft skill development. So discussion, collaboration, right? Engagement, then you're probably better off in that environment. But if you're more passive, you're quiet, you're shy, you don't really like those things, but you're still a pretty good student, then probably a bigger school, is probably better.
Thank you. Okay, so another question popped in. Does it mean colleges who accepted students from a certain high school are more likely to continue to accept students from the same school since they have past data for reference compared to a high school the college never recruited students before? Is that so-called feeder school?
I love the question all the way to the last question. Well, let me answer the last one. Yeah, there's absolutely feeder schools. They're absolutely feeder schools. Okay, so some of your more prestigious boarding schools from the East Coast, Choate, Lawrenceville, yeah, they're clear feeder schools, especially Ivy feeders. I would argue that in some ways, Harker's a feeder. Okay, Bellarmine's a feeder. So yes, feeder schools actually do exist. I'm sorry, whoever else is listening that is in my space, I'm telling the truth. But in terms of recruiting, I mean, maybe evaluating, I think that colleges always put the best effort to evaluate students to admit them. They want to accept them. So they're going to want to get as much information about school. Sometimes you have a new school and there's no data, but so the college literally have to visit the school, maybe talk to the school administrators, counselors to get a really good feeling about the school itself so that they can properly evaluate students. Yeah. But, I mean, I think how many, like UC, did they have soft quotas? Maybe. But, certainly UC, a lot of data. So they know from each school every year, approximately how many maybe spaces they want to give out. If it's a new school, charter school, there's not a lot of information. I think that's really going to come down to your counselor and your administrators to reach out to colleges and convey that data, and to give colleges a good sense of what their school is like. There's a lot of small schools in the area, right? I mean, I think Bentley comes to mind. I think Athenian comes to mind. Oakwood and Morgan Hill comes to mind. Very small schools, and they've had long histories. So absolutely.
Thank you. The next question is kind of generic, but it's, what should I look for in a college?
Wow. The first thing you should look for is academic resources. Once you figured out a major, you want to compare majors in different schools and see what resources are available in the major. For example, what's the required curriculum in my major? What are the elective class options in the major? Sometimes some schools have more, some less. What are the professors in the department researching? Can undergraduate students have access and help those professors? Do they have internships available? Do they have connections to industry to give me some experience in school? And also, is there student organizations surrounding the major that acts as a support group? All right. And also, what the matriculation data. So when students graduate in this major, where do they go? Colleges will provide that data. 30% go to grad school, right? 70% go into industry. I don't know, 12% quit. That data is out there. Every school, they keep that, so you can ask for that information. So that's all under the first item of academics. The secondarily, I think you have to think about your experiences. Asian families are don't tend to care too much about the environment, but I think it's more and more important, especially given the polarizing politics in our country, right? The school shootings and Asian American violence. I think it's important. So, do you want a rural setting, urban setting, suburban setting? You're okay with snow? You want to be on the East Coast? You want California weather? You're going to get homesick. Is the food there good? Is the politics on campus good? All of those things I think factor into that evaluation.
Thank you. Okay, so if 11th grade is not as good as 10th grade, especially got 2 Bs in Calculus BC, how bad is it to affect for a STEM major application?
It's not bad. 2 Bs is not considered bad grades. I mean, for us, maybe Asians, I think maybe we think Bs is bad grades. But generally, colleges Bs are fine. And sometimes kids get Bs because teachers are hard, extra hard, notoriously hard, right? And kids, it's like the only B they have, and the B stands out. But no, Bs in general are not bad, and I don't think that it necessarily affects negatively into your STEM major applications. And if I were evaluating your STEM application, I would go, okay, you got a B, that's interesting. But did you redeem yourself? In other words, what about the AP exam? Did you take it? Did you get a 5, right? Did you cover for it? Did you make up for it? And then I'm going to quickly go to the activities to see, what STEM activities probably that you did that could help me explain or soften the Bs. But Bs are not bad, right? I mean, if you were saying and there's plenty of programs STEM programs that will accept students with Bs and even Cs, or maybe even Ds, so it depends on how you calibrate.
Thank you. What research opportunities exist for students?
It depends on what field. And earlier I mentioned a couple. There's a Horizon is a good research program, and Pioneer is a good research program. And a number of colleges in the summertime have research programs that high school students can apply to. Cosmo is not necessarily research, but I think I can make a case for that. Some programs are, and then Santa Barbara has a couple of options, and then Santa Cruz has a couple of options. But in general, there's many colleges out there have research programs for kids to various degrees and difficulty levels.
When you say feeder school, you mentioned Harker, and what's the second one? Or is the second one Bellarmine?
I knew I should have answered this question, right? Yeah, I personally would consider Bellarmine a feeder school, absolutely. And if my friends at Bellarmine, my colleagues at Bellarmine see this, I'm sorry. That's how I feel. Let's have lunch. Anyway.
Thank you. What can I do to make my college essay stand out?
That's a really general question. It's very broad. So I might be able to just kind of give you more general, broad answers. Forgive me. But your college essay is really ultimately about your self-awareness and your maturity. Okay. I can give you one interesting fact. When I look at my students over the years, and when I look at the students who have gone to, selective schools or schools that everyone cares about or whatever, quote unquote good schools, whatever you want to call it, I think that the differentiation is that students at the end of the day, once they have established a certain academic profile, we think that they're strong enough, as they're certainly a good fit, they're certainly a good candidate. The ones that have gotten in tend to be students who are very mature or more mature and also more self-aware. Yeah. So college essays are all about self-awareness. And so you have to talk more about you and not the things that you've done. Because the things that you've done reveal who you are. You have to always get through the things that you've done and talk about who you are in some way.
Thank you. When would be the good time to take the SAT? 10th grade or 11th grade?
I personally think 10th grade, it makes the most sense, just because I said earlier, you have a natural advantage to take it later because of brain development, cognitive development, knowledge accumulation, and also, with all the academic self-efficacy, all those reasons go into success on a test. So I think the later, the better in general, but I think the Bay Area, especially, in the South Bay, Silicon Valley, summer after 10th grade is when kids like to prepare. In the fall of 11th grade is when kids like to take tests. But I don't think that they'll peak necessarily. I think kids in general will peak later. I think they'll peak probably later, in the season, probably like summer or fall of, after 10th grade, 11th grade. So if I comparing 10th, 11th, I would say 11th probably in general better.
Thank you. The next question is, how important is choosing your major for private universities? Does it hurt if it's undecided, or can you benefit from listing less popular majors?
Say that again. I missed the first part.
Oh, how important is choosing your major for private universities?
And then, what was the second one? Like choosing less popular majors?
Does it hurt if it's undecided, or can you benefit from listing less popular majors?
Yes, for some schools it doesn't hurt if you're undecided. Although I think my advice is this: if you're doing critical thinking and you have some self-awareness and you're starting early, I think that in general, human beings always like to do the things that we're good at. And so if you look at a high school student's profile at the end of 11th grade and you look at his or her activities, those activities come together with the grades and test scores, and they tell a story, whether you like it or not. Okay. And if you don't have activities, that tells a story too, right? So whether you like it or not, your activities and your profile does tell a story. And so if your profile naturally tells a story and your major doesn't make much sense to that story, that's going to be a problem. Actually, if you're talking about the most selective schools, right? Because then that connection is gone. Like, then you think, well, is that person really serious about this major, or is this person not likely to stay with this major? That's a potential red flag, right? I think undecided, like more focus on decided makes sense. For example, I did a lot of STEM or engineering stuff, but I'm not sure which engineering, so I'll go undecided engineering. I think that makes sense, But if your profile has a clear natural storyline and you go totally undecided, to me, I think that we can probably have better decision making. And I think that a lot of people try to go the unpopular major route and then transfer later. And I think the schools know.
So how do pre-college summer programs help college applications?
Yeah, pre-college summer program is a very, very general term. It's a very generic term. It basically, right now, people talk about anything that you can do in the summer as a pre-college program, but fundamentally there's only a couple of, maybe 3 or 4. So you have, you have summer school. So you have like a Dianza or, community college class. You have a college class from Berkeley or Stanford or one of the colleges for credit, for grade, right? Actual college class. And then you have pre-collegiate programs, which are not catered to college students, but catered to high school students. And you have summer camps or summer intensives, where it's more experiential, maybe no grade, no credit, right? And then there's maybe research programs. And there's a question about Pioneer. Yeah, it was Horizon and Pioneers was what I said. I think that's Ivy on there. I think I know what that is. But yeah, pre-college programs help in the sense that they give students a opportunity or many opportunities to direct their own learning and to build out a body of work in high school in areas that are interested in.
Thank you. Next question is, how easy is it to graduate in 4 years if you study abroad in college?
Say that one more time.
How easy is it to graduate in 4 years if you study abroad in college?
It's very easy because many times study abroad they give you credit towards graduation. So usually you graduate in the same period of time. Yeah, very easy.
Thank you. So the next question is, for a research program, you mentioned for a Horizon program, is the second program Pioneer?
Yeah, Pioneer. Mm-hmm.
Would you say Bay Area's academically competitive high schools are feeder schools for MIT, as it seems they recruit a good number of kids from the Bay Area?
Yeah, I'm not sure MIT has, I'm not sure any schools necessarily feed into MIT specifically. I think, I think they're at like 4% acceptance rate. So I'm not sure because it's a really hard school to feed into, but so I guess I would say no. I mean, I think Bay Area kids stand out because Bay Area kids tend to be more STEM focused, and MIT is largely known as a very strong STEM school. And number two, we're in Silicon Valley. There's a lot of STEM out here and a lot of STEM parents with STEM resources. So, I think that in general, Bay Area can yield a lot of, many, many exciting STEM students compared to maybe the rest of the country.
Thank you. The next question is, what extracurricular activities do you recommend for people who do not find their career aspirations yet?
First of all, welcome to the club. That's not abnormal. In fact, if you're, it's very unlikely that you find your career aspiration in high school. Even if you did a lot of self-assessments and you came to great self-awareness, all of those should be used as a reference point. Okay, so what would I say? I would say that continue to explore, right? Read that first part of the question again, because my neighbor is sawing something.
What extracurricular activities do you recommend?
So extracurricular activities depends on what grade level you're in. I would say that if you're on the younger side, or if you're in the earlier grades, go ahead and explore things. Keep an open mind about it. But if you're more closer to college application season, I would say stick to one thing, stick to something that's more specific and give you some actual skills, and then maybe talk to a counselor to help you kind of narrow down your the areas that you can go into, and maybe discuss with someone. I'm happy to help you, give you a free consultation to help you with that. So you can call me, maybe BRI, I'll give you my contact. I can look at your profile and give you some recommendations, free of charge. That's no problem. But it's hard to say, because it really depends on what stage you are in the high school, in your high school career. You could do a gap year as well. So you can take a break, right? And after you graduate high school, you can take a gap year and then apply to college 1 year later. And a lot of times students learn a lot about themselves and the world, in that 1 year gap year. And then, they're better people and more ready for college too. That's totally an option.
Thank you. Okay, so how do we find good internship opportunities as a high school student?
Yeah, I wouldn't even say that there are that many great opportunities for internship as high school students, because I personally have some very strong feelings about internships. I think that internships are really only good if you are actually involved in the work that the company that you're working for is doing, right? So too many times my students do internships, what they're really doing is just watching other people work, and their involvement is very passive. So to me, that internship doesn't have too much value, because it's more of a shadowing project. So, and also the timing of the internship is really, really important. If you do an internship too early, you don't have enough foundational knowledge or understanding. So you don't really get the most out of the internship. You're just kind of observing, or maybe if you're doing, but you're not doing with any real awareness. So I think you have to at least have those foundational pieces there so that the internship, you can maximize your experience in the internship. But resources, students tend to get internships through their parents. There's some websites on the internet that you can find college internships, like internships.com or Chegg, CHEGG. There's college internships, sorry, high school internships, but a lot of them have, age requirements and things like that.
Thank you. The next question is, what is the weight of the GPA, SAT, extracurriculars, and college essays?
What is the weight of the extracurricular GPA? Okay, I don't know the weighting, but I can tell you what's most important. GPA is always going to be most important. Okay, up until recently, SAT was second important, but it's going to probably go way down now. Okay, so I think your essays will have more importance following GPA, and I think that your recommendations will have importance following that.
Thank you. Okay. Would pre-college courses with credit be better than the summer program without credit, but more focusing on STEM immersion studying?
Credit is oftentimes something that I think parents have a misconception that they need it. Credit's only good when you can transfer the credit to the college that you attend and maybe save some classes or ultimately save some money, because colleges basically charges fees based on credit or unit. So I think that if that's not a priority, then that should be the least of your concerns. I think that's a bonus. I don't look at programs based on credit or grades because a lot of students don't need those type of curriculum or don't function well in settings with that much structure or even that much academic pressure to perform. I think the answer comes down to which one fits into your high school planning the best and it gives you the most value and the best experience, because that's how I define quality personally for my kids. So we don't always chase credit. If it's the best thing for you to do for this particular profile and it's the most meaningful, you get to learn a lot, and the credit and the grade is just all bonus.
Thank you. How do college admissions evaluate a student's application?
How do college admissions evaluate a student application? So they tend to look at it very holistically, which is completely. So they look at grades and test scores, obviously, for and recommendations, and then the activities that they've done. And this is a very general question, so I kind of got a high level answer. But I think at the end of the day, I would say that colleges make a really good effort to give every student a really fair review and a really fair chance to be admitted. But what they have to do is they have to learn a lot of data about the student, about his or her school, and about his or her personal family context, and put everything in the right and proper context. So that's what holistic review is.
Thank you. Do UCs value weighted or unweighted GPA more?
Yeah, so UCs actually only look at weighted GPA between 10th and 11th. There's really no such thing as an unweighted UCA. The only way to end up with an unweighted GPA is if you took no weighted classes. Surprise.
Thank you. The next question is, do the colleges consider 9th grade GPA in extracurriculars?
So some colleges actually do look at 9th grade GPAs. I mean, but most schools actually don't. So it depends on the school. But I think that in general, no. Yeah. But I think it's a good reference point. I think that if your 9th grade grades are on there on the transcript, but they can easily look at it. I think that maybe it does have a little bit of a weight in terms of, confirming what they believe about you from your 10th and 11th grade performance, right? They can, 9th grade's pretty good too. I think that makes them feel a little bit better.
Thank you. So do piano diplomas or music competitions award matter in a college applications? Like, for example, if they get like awards from 9th grade to 12th grade.
Is this your question, Anna? Is that why you like, for example, yeah, smiling. Yeah. Those absolutely matter because number one, it's a long-term engagement. Number two, you have something tangible to show for it. And number three, even if you're not applying to be a music major, those things showed ultimately how you spent your time in high school. And really, at the end of the day, colleges want to see how you spend your time, right? So don't make the mistake of thinking, oh, this is not related to my major, or this, I didn't have any achievement, or I don't have anything to show for it on, you know, on like a competition or anything. You still spend time. If you spend time on it, it should go on the application usually. And it will help you.
Thank you so much. So that's the end of all the Q&A questions. So that'll also be the end of our seminar. Thank you so much, Peter, for coming and making your presentation and also answering all of these questions. We'll be playing a BRI video for anyone who's interested, but that will be all for today. Thank you.